We would like to start today's video with a big thank you to our very generous patrons. We would especially like to thank one of our most recent patrons, Drek Riffin. Thank you so much for your support, Drek. We would also like to thank Meerkat Nia for requesting this review over our Patreon. If you too enjoy our content and wish to offer support, please visit our Patreon link in the description below. The Viper Mark 4 by Faulcon Delacy is an up-armoured sibling of the Viper Mark 3. Together they make up Faulcon Delacy's position in the low-cost combat-focused vessel market, and the similarities between the two vessels at first glance is somewhat uncanny. The Viper Mark 4 has a wider hull owing to its capacity for greater armour protection, but visually shares almost all other features with the Mark 3. Don't let that fool you though. As we will see in this video, the differences are actually quite large and make an enormous difference to performance. From the pilot's seat, you will be treated to the same basic but functional cockpit as the Mark III, with suitable visibility for combat and little on the inside of the ship to distract you while fighting. The Viper Mark IV's manoeuvring capabilities are one of the most comfortable and responsive I have ever experienced. It feels like the ship was built to operate with flight assist off. Unlike the Mark III, the boost seems to be flawlessly balanced for getting you right where you need to end up, and the thruster response allows sticking to a target with very little effort indeed, affording flexibility beyond its lackluster cooling. The Viper Mark IV shares the weapon hardpoints of the Mark III, with 2 small and 2 medium. As with the Mark III, the smalls are placed either side of the canopy and offer excellent convergence, and the mediums are on the underside of the hull, still offering acceptable convergence for fixed weapons. Like the Mark III, the Viper Mark IV is limited to 2 heatsink launchers, and this usually has a big impact on AX performance. But the Mark IV's additional armour potential allows it to weather storms that the Mark III just cannot. A larger power plant than the Mark III offers more room for Guardian module reinforcements to be used, though like the Mark III, the Class 3 power distributor can leave you wanting for available power sometimes. These changes all add weight to the ship, which do lower the top speed, but will this affect its performance fighting Thargoids? Let's see how the bigger of the 2 Vipers fares. First we face off against the Cyclops, and for this fight I would be firing all Gauss simultaneously. This will spike the heat, but the Viper is a very small target, and against the Cyclops the incoming fire won't be that punishing anyway. The Viper's excellent aiming mobility makes taking on the swarm if you have flak very comfortable, and adjusting to the motions of the swarm takes very little effort. As already mentioned, the Viper Mark IV is incredibly responsive in flight assist off, with pinpoint thruster responses, allowing very accurate positioning and making it a lot of fun to fly. The Viper has no problem taking down a Cyclops, Its incredibly favourable orbiting characteristics make very light work of the weaker Stargoid Interceptor. Next we will be facing off against the Basilisk, but on this occasion, the Basilisk and Medusa were in the instance together. So let's see how the Viper Mark IV handles a multi-Goid situation. So here I am trying a hyper-aggressive flying style involving boost orbits and again firing all Gauss simultaneously. This still spikes the heat, but a small target orbiting at high speed makes most shots miss regardless. Flying in a flakless style though can put pressure on a ship when it has so few heat sinks available. And while the Viper Mark IV can pursue the Basilisk effortlessly, this attack one required a re-exertion and resulted in running out of heat sinks. The Viper Mark IV makes for an incredibly stable aiming platform, so during the pursuit of the Basilisk like this, landing the shots on the heart is very easy. Now, the Basilisk is far and away the most evasive of the interceptors, and so this slightly limits your potential for aggressive flight to a degree. During long pursuits you can be as aggressive as you'd like to be, but against the Basilisk at least it is better to fall back on more traditional orbiting methods. And even under these conditions, with a Medusa and two swarms nearby, it wasn't a great deal of effort to take out the Basilisk with this ship. If you were facing it alone, you would be able to rely on a more sustained orbit, as eliminating the swarm would make more sense outside of a multi-Goid situation. Against the Medusa now, we are back to all-out aggression. The Viper can avoid the swarm with a minimum of boosting, though if you do get caught, the Viper can also evade a missile strike with relatively low effort. As we will see in this fight, the heat spikes really don't matter as much as they would in a larger ship, because even when the heat is spiking, a lot of the salvos will miss regardless. And unlike the Viper Mark III, The Viper Mark IV has the protection level to soak up some damage from the incoming fire. Of course, split fire groups is always still an option, though can leave you wanting for heat sinks on the early hearts. With only 2 heatsink launches available, you want to deliver damage as quickly as possible, and if you've shown you have the hull to last the first couple of attacking runs, then you certainly have the hull for the later attacking runs. The Medusa is a well-balanced opponent for the Viper Mark IV. The ship handles this fight far more comfortably than the Mark III, to the point that it isn't akin to a challenge kill taking one on. Rather, it is a viable target with no special considerations needed. I did not have confidence that the Viper Mark IV could handle a Hydra, owing to the heatsink limitation, but I decided to take it out and face one to find out. The plan here was relatively straightforward. Maintain as close a range as possible to the Hydra to maximise damage output, using all gauss at once to deliver damage as quickly as possible. I had no idea if I could exert the heart before the heatsinks ran out, but was prepared to use silent running to continue the attacking run if needed. The Viper Mark IV's impressive thruster performance allows sticking to a target very closely, and amazingly, the heart exerted before I'd run out of heatsinks. Getting the exertion and landing a few shots was enough of a victory for now, so I decided to back off and refill heatsinks rather than using silent running. At least I knew now that I could exert the heart within the heatsink limit, and on the next run I was confident I would be able to get the first heart. The first heart had fallen and hull was very low, partially because on the second run I went in with very low hull to begin with. I wanted to try and take out the heart before Enrage, as I wasn't confident yet that I could maintain the same range against the Hydra with a swarm active. Repair times would be extremely long, owing partially to the fact that the Viper loses a lot of repair limpets when deploying them, far more so than other ships that I've tried. So going into Heart 2 there would be a swarm present. Amazingly, the second heart fell on the first attacking run. I attribute this to the Viper's incredibly stable aiming platform, allowing continuous shots to land on heart very comfortably. Repair times were consistently getting me into the enraged phase, but the swarm had proved to be not much of a problem, with only minimal evasive maneuvering required to avoid agitating them. On one of the later hearts, I did decide to use silent running to extend an attacking run. By this point I was fairly comfortable in the fight and knew that a couple of 100% above optimal temperature wouldn't cause significant module damage, so I thought it a worthwhile trade. The temperature was nowhere near as high as those reached during the Eagle Medusa fight, and so I knew the ship would be okay once I'd sent some heat sinks. We were well beyond the halfway point of the Hydra fight now, and victory was in sight. I was very surprised by how well the Viper Mark 4 was holding up. All we had to do now was hang on until the end. The only other re-exertion during the fight was a result of running out of ammo in 2 Gauss cannons. the Viper Mark IV had claimed its first ever Hydra kill. And I think this is a fitting end to what turned out to be a surprise performer in the domain of AX. The Viper Mark IV is an outstanding AX vessel, with one of the best flight assist off manoeuvring profiles I've flown. You have to contend with the heatsink limit, but the steady aim coupled with the very precise boost and thruster control make this an incredibly effective Thargoid killer. One that I would highly recommend